July 28, 1944. A narrow lane near Saint-Lô, France. Staff Sergeant William McBride gripped his tank commander's hatch as his Sherman rolled cautiously through the Norman Bocage. The 23-year-old from Oklahoma had never seen terrain like this. What his training instructors at Fort Knox had called simple farmland was instead a maze of earthen walls topped with centuries-old hedgerows, each one a natural fortress. Through the periscope, he watched another Sherman from his platoon burn 200 yards ahead, black smoke pouring from its turret. The Germans called them Ronsons, after the cigarette lighter that always worked on the first strike. 3 days ago, McBride had written in a letter home that would be found in his personal effects decades later at the National Archives. We trained for open tank warfare, racing across plains like Patton promised us. Nobody told us France would be divided into thousands of tiny battlefields where a single German with a Panzerfaust could turn a 30-ton tank into a coffin. Nobody told us their Panthers could kill us from distances we cannot even see them. But we are learning, and we are learning fast. The mathematics of survival in Normandy were being written not in doctrine manuals, but in blood and burning metal. American tank crews faced a brutal equation that their superior officers had failed to calculate. The German Panther tank mounted a 75mm gun with such velocity it could penetrate a Sherman's frontal armor from over a mile away. The Sherman's standard 75mm gun could not penetrate a Panther's frontal armor, even at point-blank range. The Tiger's 88mm gun was even more devastating, yet by war's end, American tank crews would develop tactics so effective that they achieved favorable kill ratios against these superior machines. The transformation began on June 6, 1944, when the first Shermans landed on the beaches of Normandy. The 741st Tank Battalion, attached to the 1st Infantry Division, was one of 5 independent tank battalions that hit the beaches on D-Day. Companies B and C were equipped with amphibious DD Shermans designed to swim ashore from landing craft. On the morning of June 6th, facing rough seas and 6-foot waves, the decision was made to launch 29 DD tanks approximately 6,000 yards offshore. The result was catastrophic. 27 of the 29 tanks sank within minutes, drowning their crews or forcing them to swim for survival in the frigid Channel waters. Only 2 DD tanks from the 741st reached Omaha Beach under their own power. Company A, equipped with conventional Shermans fitted with deep wading equipment, fared marginally better. 6 tanks and 3 tank dozers made it ashore, though 2 tanks and a dozer were lost when their LCT hit a mine crossing the channel. These surviving tanks of the 741st, along with 38 tanks from the 743rd Tank Battalion, which had wisely decided not to launch their DDS in the rough seas, provided crucial fire support to infantry pinned on the deadly beach. Tank Commander Lieutenant Dean Rockwell of Company B wrote in his after-action report, "We watched tanks brew up before we even reached the seawall. The Germans had pre-registered their guns on every approach. Each tank that survived long enough to fire drew immediate counterfire from positions we could not locate through the smoke and dust. It taught the American tankers their first critical lesson about fighting in France. The enemy does not always present himself as a target. Sometimes you must create the opportunity to kill him." The breakout from the beaches brought American armor face to face with the Norman Bocage. This landscape consisted of dirt banks averaging 4 feet high, crowned with tangled masses of hawthorn, brambles, and trees whose roots penetrated deep into the embankments, creating a patchwork of tiny fields rarely more than 200 feet across. To American tank crews fresh from training on the open plains, the Bocage was a nightmare made real. Sergeant James Flowers of the 2nd Armoured Division recorded his first encounter with hedgerow country in letters preserved by his family for 70 years. We thought the French countryside would be rolling hills and pretty farms. Instead, we found ourselves trapped in a maze where you cannot see more than 1 field ahead. The hedgerows channel you into narrow lanes barely wide enough for a tank. The Germans wait in the next field with anti-tank guns positioned to fire straight down these killing lanes. Every advance costs us tanks. The German defenders had quickly recognized the tactical advantages the Bocage offered. Oberst Fritz Bayerlein, commander of Panzer Lehr Division, organized his forces to maximize these natural defenses. His defensive doctrine, captured in documents recovered after the war, revealed a systematic approach: position anti-tank guns and Panzerfausts to cover all approaches between hedgerows. Camouflage is critical. The Americans cannot destroy what they cannot see. Allow their tanks to advance into fields where they are trapped by embankments on all sides. Then engage from multiple directions simultaneously. This doctrine proved devastatingly effective through June and early July 1944. The 3rd Armoured Division, which landed in Normandy on June 24th with 232 Sherman tanks, would lose 648 Shermans completely destroyed during the European campaign, with another 700 knocked out and repaired, representing a cumulative loss rate of 580%. The human cost was equally terrible. When a Sherman was penetrated by armour-piercing rounds, the impact sent white-hot metal fragments ricocheting through the crew compartment. When ammunition stored in the hull ignited, the resulting explosion often blew the turret completely off the tank. Crew members who survived the initial penetration had seconds to escape before fire consumed the vehicle. British research conducted during the Normandy campaign found that 82% of penetrated Shermans caught fire. American surveys concluded 65% burned. Corporal Robert Sims, a loader with the 741st Tank Battalion, survived 3 tanks being knocked out under him. His personal account, recorded for an oral history project in 1989, captured the terror. You trained yourself not to think about fire. You told yourself the next round would miss. Then you watched a tank 50 yards away get hit, and you saw men burning, and you knew that was your future too if your luck ran out. The ones who survived learned to fight smarter. The first adaptation American tank crews made was learning to never fight alone. The 5-tank platoon became the fundamental fighting unit, with tanks working together to protect each other's vulnerable spots. The standard Sherman had a 5-man crew. The tank commander stood in the turret. The gunner sat to the commander's left, operating the main gun and coaxial machine gun. The loader stood to the commander's right. In the hull, the driver sat in the left front position, while the bow gunner and assistant driver occupied the right front, operating a 30 caliber machine gun. Lieutenant Edwin Leiper of the 2nd Armoured Division developed one of the early tactical innovations that would save American lives. His technique, documented in after-action reports from July 1944, became standard doctrine within weeks. Never advance a single tank into an unknown field. Send 1 tank forward to draw fire while 2 more tanks position themselves to observe from different angles. When the forward tank is engaged, the observing tanks can identify the enemy position by muzzle flash. Immediately return fire with high explosive and white phosphorus rounds. The forward tank must reverse immediately or it will be destroyed. This bound and overwatch technique required discipline and courage from the forward tank crew, who knew they were being used as bait. But it allowed American tankers to locate and kill German anti-tank positions that would otherwise remain hidden. The crews called it fishing for Germans. The most significant tactical breakthrough came from understanding how to exploit the Sherman's advantages against the Panther's weaknesses. While the Panther was superior in frontal armour and gun range, it suffered from mechanical unreliability, slow turret traverse, and limited crew training by mid-1944. Captain James Burt of the 66th Armoured Regiment, 2nd Armoured Division, articulated the tactics that would eventually become doctrine in his combat diary. The Panther's gun can kill us from distances where we cannot effectively fight back. Their frontal armour is impenetrable to our 75mm. But the Panther's turret traverse is painfully slow, often taking 30 seconds or more to rotate 180 degrees. Our Sherman's turret can traverse a full circle in 10 seconds. This is our advantage. We do not fight Panthers frontally. We force them to turn their turret, then we move faster than they can track us. Get to their flank or rear where armour is thinner. A 75mm round into a Panther's side armour at close range will penetrate and kill the tank. This required American tank crews to act with an aggressiveness that seemed suicidal, but was actually based on cold calculation. The Sherman's speed and manoeuvrability on solid ground exceeded the Panther's capabilities. Where a Panther needed minutes to reverse or reposition, a Sherman could dart between hedgerows, using terrain to mask its movement while working toward a flanking position. Sergeant Lafayette Pool of the 3rd Armored Division's 32nd Armored Regiment became one of the most successful practitioners of these tactics. Between June 27th and September 19th, 1944, Pool and his crew were credited with destroying 12 enemy tanks, 258 armored vehicles and self-propelled guns, killing over 1,000 German soldiers, and capturing 250 prisoners in just 81 days of combat across 3 successive Shermans. His driver, Corporal Wilbert Richards, recalled Pool's philosophy in an oral history recorded in 1982. Pool always said the Germans thought too much like tankers and not enough like hunters. A Panther crew would set up a perfect defensive position and wait for us. Pool would spot the position. Then, instead of attacking directly, he would maneuver around behind them. By the time the Panther crew realized we were behind them, Pool already had them targeted. The technique required intimate knowledge of local terrain, which American crews acquired through careful map study and aggressive patrolling. Tank commanders would dismount and physically walk the ground when possible, noting every lane, every gap in the hedgerows, every position that offered concealment and cover. Some American tank commanders adopted methods that their superiors considered unconventional, drawing on distinctly American cultural experiences. These tactics, sometimes referred to as cowboy tricks in after-action reports and personal accounts, emphasized deception, speed, and exploitation of terrain in ways that German tankers, trained in rigid Prussian military tradition, did not anticipate. Lieutenant Raymond Dunnigan of the 4th Armored Division explained the concept in a letter to his brother written in August 1944. The Germans fight by the book. They set up their Panthers in good defensive positions and expect us to attack the way doctrine says we should. But a lot of us grew up on ranches or farms. You do not charge Panthers head-on. You spook them into moving where you want them, then you cut them off and finish them. The specific tactics varied, but they shared common elements. One technique involved having one Sherman deliberately expose itself while other tanks maneuvered through concealed routes. The Panther crew would focus on the visible threat, rotating their turret to engage, while other Shermans closed from different directions. Another tactic exploited the Panther's tendency to reverse when threatened. American tank crews learned to position themselves so that a reversing Panther would back directly into the sights of another Sherman. This required careful coordination, with tanks communicating constantly. The infantry-tank cooperation that developed in Normandy also played a crucial role. American infantry learned to provide critical reconnaissance for tanks. Tanks learned to provide covering fire that allowed infantry to advance through hedgerows and clear German defensive positions. The 741st Tank Battalion's experience demonstrates how this cooperation evolved. When the battalion was first attached to the 2nd Infantry Division on June 15, 1944, coordination with infantry was poor. The battalion spent late June conducting intensive training at the platoon level, with tank crews and infantry squads practicing together in the Bocage itself. They developed hand signals that could be seen through smoke and dust. Within 2 weeks, casualty rates for both tanks and infantry dropped significantly. The most celebrated technical innovation of the Normandy campaign was the development of the hedgerow cutter, known as the Rhino or the prongs. When a Sherman attempted to climb over a hedgerow embankment, the tank would tilt nose up at a steep angle, exposing its thin belly armor to enemy fire and pointing its gun uselessly at the sky. German defenders learned to position anti-tank weapons to catch Shermans in this vulnerable moment. The solution came from Sergeant Curtis Culin of the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron, 2nd Armored Division. According to military historian Max Hastings, Culin was inspired by a soldier named Roberts, who suggested mounting saw teeth on the front of tanks to cut through hedgerows. While others laughed, Culin recognized the potential and built a working prototype. The device consisted of steel prongs cut from German beach obstacles, welded to the front of a Sherman tank's hull, creating tusks that could dig into the base of a hedgerow. When the tank advanced, the prongs cut through the earthen embankment while the tank remained level, allowing it to push through without exposing its vulnerable underside. On July 14, 1944, Lieutenant General Omar Bradley observed a demonstration of Culin's device. Bradley's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. He ordered the modification installed on as many tanks as possible before the launch of Operation Cobra. Within 2 weeks, American units had modified over 500 Sherman tanks with hedgerow cutters. The British independently developed a similar device they called prongs. The impact on battlefield mobility was significant. The Rhino tanks allowed American armor to advance through Bocage more rapidly and with less vulnerability. Tanks could now choose their own routes through the hedgerows rather than being channeled into killing zones. The combination of improved tactics, better infantry-tank cooperation, and technical innovations set the stage for Operation Cobra, the breakout offensive that would transform the Normandy campaign. Cobra was planned as a massive assault on a narrow front, with concentrated aerial bombing creating a gap through which American armor could pour into German rear areas. The operation began on July 25, 1944. Over 1,500 heavy and medium bombers dropped more than 3,000 tons of bombs on German positions west of Saint-Lô. The bombing was devastating but imprecise, with some ordnance falling on American positions and causing casualties, including Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, the highest-ranking American officer killed in the European theatre. Despite the tragic friendly fire incidents, the bombing shattered German defences. The 2nd Armoured Division and the 3rd Armoured Division were the exploitation force designated to break through. The 2nd Armoured, commanded by Major General Edward Brooks, attacked racing south toward Coutances, cutting off German forces in the Cotentin Peninsula. The tank crews faced a fundamental change. After weeks of grinding through hedgerows, they now found themselves breaking into more open country, where speed and manoeuvrability mattered more than cautious tactics. Staff Sergeant William McBride found himself leading his platoon in a race south on July 28th. His personal account captures the transformation. "We had spent weeks creeping from hedgerow to hedgerow. Suddenly we were racing across open country at 25 miles per hour, turrets traversing constantly. We spotted a column of German vehicles ahead, probably retreating units. My gunner put 3 rounds into the lead vehicle before they even realized we were there. The column scattered, and we pursued them for 2 miles. The breakout created opportunities for mobile warfare that favored American strengths. The Sherman's mechanical reliability meant American tanks could maintain a high operational tempo day after day, while German Panthers and Tigers suffered frequent breakdowns. American logistics superiority ensured that fuel, ammunition, and spare parts flowed forward continuously, while German supply lines were interdicted by Allied air power. The air superiority enjoyed by Allied forces proved decisive. German armoured formations attempting to move during daylight were subjected to devastating attacks by fighter bombers, particularly the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. American tank crews quickly learned to call in airstrikes when they encountered German armour. The combination of American tanks fixing German forces in place and airstrikes destroying them proved lethal. The Battle of Arracourt in September 1944 provided a textbook example of how American tank tactics had evolved. The engagement pitted Combat Command A of the 4th Armoured Division against elements of the German 5th Panzer Army, including newly formed panzer brigades equipped with Panther tanks. On paper, the Germans held significant advantages. They outnumbered the Americans in tanks and possessed qualitatively superior vehicles, but the battle demonstrated that superior equipment meant little when wielded by poorly trained crews using inflexible tactics. Combat Command A, under Colonel Bruce Clark, positioned his forces on terrain of his own, choosing around the village of Arracourt, with tanks hull down behind ridges and infantry positioned to guard against German infiltration. The battle began on September 18, 1944, when the first German attack by the 111th Panzer Brigade fell on Luneville. This initial attack was repelled with the destruction of 24 German tanks. On September 19th, thick morning fog blanketed the battlefield. This negated the Panthers' range advantage and forced both sides to fight at close quarters. The fog also prevented the Germans from conducting reconnaissance, so they advanced blindly into positions where American tanks and tank destroyers waited in ambush. The Germans employed rigid attack tactics, advancing in column formation along predictable routes. American forces allowed the German columns to advance until they were within effective range, then opened fire from multiple directions. The Panthers' slow turret traverse became a fatal weakness as they attempted to engage threats from different angles simultaneously. American Shermans used the fog for concealment, maneuvering to flanking positions while German crews were occupied. The fighting lasted through September 29th, with German forces launching repeated attacks that followed essentially the same pattern. Poor tactical deployment repeatedly exposed Panther side armor to Shermans that had maneuvered to advantageous positions. American crews demonstrated their superior training by consistently achieving first-shot kills. The result was a decisive American victory. Combat Command destroyed over 75 German tanks and armored vehicles, while losing fewer than 25 Shermans, demonstrating how far American tactics had evolved since the early battles in the Bocage. The December 1944 German offensive in the Ardennes, known as the Battle of the Bulge, provided the ultimate test of American tank tactics. The Germans committed their best remaining armoured formations in a desperate attempt to split the Allied armies. The 741st Tank Battalion played a crucial role in the defence of Rocherath-Krinkelt from December 16th through 19th. The battalion faced elements of the German 6th SS Panzer Army, including Tiger and Panther tanks. The fighting was vicious close-quarters combat where German armour advantages in range and protection were minimised. American tankers employed every lesson learned during 6 months of combat, positioning tanks in hull-down defensive positions, working closely with infantry, and employing aggressive flanking tactics whenever possible. Lieutenant Colonel William Hoge of the 9th Armoured Division later described American tank tactics. "We had learned that you do not win tank fights by sitting still and trading shots with Panthers. You win by moving, always moving, forcing them to rotate their turrets while you work closer to their flanks. Even in defensive positions, our tanks were constantly repositioning after firing. The defensive tactics proved successful. American forces held the northern shoulder of the Bulge against repeated German attacks." The 741st Tank Battalion received a distinguished unit citation for its performance. The human element of these tactical successes cannot be overstated. American tank crews fought with coordination and mutual trust that only comes from surviving combat together. The 5 men in a Sherman crew became a tightly knit team, where each member's survival depended on the performance of the others. These crews developed informal combat wisdom that was passed from experienced tankers to replacements. Never silhouette your tank on a ridgeline. Always watch for dust kicked up by enemy muzzle blasts. Use white phosphorus rounds against Panthers to blind their optics. If you see a Panther, assume there are more you have not seen yet. Work with your wingman tanks to create crossfire situations. The contrast between American and German tank crew training is striking. By mid-1944, most American tank crews had months of training in the United States and additional training in England before entering combat. They benefited from realistic combined arms exercises and institutional knowledge passed down from units that had fought in North Africa and Italy. German tank crews, by contrast, faced steadily deteriorating training. Fuel shortages limited training time. The constant demand for crews at the front meant training cycles were compressed. New Panther brigades, formed in 1944, often went into action with crews that had minimal training. The impact of crew quality became evident in engagements like Arracourt, where German tactical errors resulted from inexperience rather than doctrinal failures. The American emphasis on combined arms, with tanks, infantry, artillery, and air power working together, provided a force multiplier that offset German advantages in individual weapon systems. A Sherman might not defeat a Panther in single combat at range, but a Sherman supported by infantry, tank destroyers, artillery, and fighter bombers formed part of a system that could defeat German armour through overwhelming coordinated firepower. The psychological transformation of American tank crews was profound. Men who had entered combat terrified of superior German tanks learned through experience that tactics, training, and determination could overcome material disadvantages. Technical Staff Sergeant Robert Early of the 3rd Armoured Division expressed this transformation in a letter written in March 1945. "When we first landed in France, every tank commander feared Panthers. We had been told they were invincible. Some crews froze when they saw a Panther. Then we learned the tricks. We learned where Panthers were vulnerable, how to make them turn their weak points toward us, how to get close enough to kill them. Now, when we see a Panther, we see a target. The Germans have better machines, but we are better tankers. The statistics support this assessment. Post-war analysis of tank versus tank combat in northwest Europe generally showed favorable kill ratios for American forces once tactical lessons had been learned. The often cited figure from the 3rd and 4th Armoured Divisions of approximately 3.6 Panthers destroyed for every Sherman lost in direct tank versus tank combat reflects engagements where American crews employed proper tactics. The evolution of American tank tactics provides valuable lessons about the relationship between technology, training, and tactics in warfare. Superior equipment provides advantages, but those advantages can be negated through superior tactics, better training, and more effective combined arms integration. The Germans possessed technically superior tanks, but these advantages could not compensate for fuel shortages, inadequate crew training, poor logistics, and tactical inflexibility. The development of what became known as cowboy tricks in American tank warfare reflected a broader military culture that valued initiative, flexibility, and practical problem-solving. The willingness of junior leaders like Sergeant Culin to develop innovations without waiting for higher headquarters approval was characteristically American. The adoption of flanking tactics that emphasized speed and deception drew on American cultural experiences, particularly the frontier tradition and the working knowledge of terrain that many rural Americans brought to the service. The role of mechanical reliability deserves emphasis. The Sherman was a reliable tank that could operate continuously with relatively simple maintenance. This allowed American units to maintain high operational tempos, while German units experienced declining readiness due to breakdowns. American logistics superiority ensured that destroyed or damaged tanks were rapidly replaced. The industrial capacity of the United States produced nearly 50,000 Sherman tanks during the war, an almost incomprehensible number compared to the approximately 6,000 Panthers Germany manufactured. Staff Sergeant Lafayette Pool was severely wounded on September 19, 1944, when his 3rd tank, named In the Mood, was destroyed by German fire near the Siegfried Line. He survived the war, but lost a leg. His crew continued fighting. Corporal Wilbert Richards later wrote that everything Pool taught them kept them alive through the rest of the war. Staff Sergeant William McBride survived the war despite his Sherman being knocked out twice more. He returned to Oklahoma and rarely spoke about his experiences, but in a late-life interview conducted by his grandson, he offered this reflection. "We were not better tankers because we were Americans. We were better because we had to be. The Germans gave us no choice but to learn or die. We learned, we adapted, we figured out how to fight with what we had and make it work against what they had." The legacy of American tank tactics extended well beyond the conflict itself. The doctrinal lessons about combined arms warfare, the importance of mobility and flanking maneuvers, and the value of reliable equipment produced in sufficient quantities all influenced post-war American armor doctrine. The term cowboy tricks, used informally by American tankers to describe their unconventional flanking tactics and aggressive maneuvers, reflected pride in an approach that emphasized individual initiative and practical problem-solving. These were skilled professionals who understood that survival and success required flexibility, cunning, and the courage to close with a more powerful enemy on terms that negated his advantages. The mathematics of tank combat that seemed so unfavorable in June 1944 had been rewritten by December. American crews had learned to turn the battlefield into a chess match, where positioning, timing, and coordinated movement mattered more than armor thickness or gun caliber. The Normandy Bocage became a classroom where lessons were learned in blood and fire. Those lessons transformed green crews into veterans who could face German armor without fear, confident in their tactics and their ability to win through superior technique rather than superior technology. When the final German forces surrendered in May 1945, American armoured divisions had advanced from the beaches of Normandy to the heart of Germany, fighting and winning against some of the most capable armoured forces ever fielded. They accomplished this not with better tanks, but with better tactics, better training, better logistics, and an institutional culture that rewarded innovation and adaptation. The story of American tank crews in Normandy demonstrates that in warfare, initial disadvantages can be overcome through determination, intelligence, and the willingness to learn from experience. The Sherman crews who developed the tactics to defeat Panthers and Tigers wrote a chapter in military history that continues to resonate. The hedgerows of Normandy stand as testament to both the terrible cost of war and the capacity of soldiers to adapt, overcome, and ultimately triumph against daunting odds.